My feet were swollen inside my shoes by the time I pulled into the driveway that evening. 11 hours on the floor of a busy insurance claims office will do that to you. Not glamorous work, nothing like the nurses you see on TV, just me and a headset and a computer screen for the better part of 3 decades. I was 63 years old, 2 years away from retirement, and all I wanted was to sit in my own kitchen, pour myself a glass of sweet tea, and not talk to anyone for at least an hour. I noticed the truck first. A big white pickup I didn't recognize, parked halfway on my lawn like the person driving it had never heard of a driveway. I sat in my car for a moment, just staring at it. Then I went inside. My son-in-law was standing in my living room with a man I had never seen before. They were looking at the wall, not at a picture on the wall, at the wall itself, the drywall, the baseboards, the layout of the room. The stranger had a measuring tape in his hand. "What's going on?" I said. My son-in-law, whose name is Brett, turned around with that smile he always had ready, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Hey, Lorraine," he started, but I stopped him right there. "My name is not Lorraine," I said. "My name is Mildred. You've known me for 4 years. He laughed like I'd made a joke. Right. Look, this is just Gary. We're just getting some measurements for a renovation idea we've been kicking around." I looked at Gary. Gary had the decency to look uncomfortable. He folded up his tape measure and said something about calling later and left through the front door faster than he came in. I set my purse down on the hall table very carefully. "A renovation idea," I said. "In my house, that you didn't mention to me." "We were going to tell you," Brett said. "It's just early stages." My daughter came in from the kitchen at that moment. Her name is Alicia, and she is 31 years old, and she married Brett 2.5 years ago. And the two of them had been living in my house, in the bedroom down the hall that used to be her childhood room, for 18 months. The plan, when they first asked, was 6 months, just until they got back on their feet. Brett had lost his job, and Alicia was between positions, and I had the space, and they were my family, and so I said yes. I want to be clear about that. I said yes because I love my daughter, not because I was afraid of her, not because I didn't know how to say no. I said yes because at that moment, it felt like the right thing to do for someone I loved. What I didn't understand yet was that Brett had a very particular way of looking at generosity as the first step in a longer negotiation. "What renovation?" I asked my daughter. Alicia looked at Brett. That was the moment I should have clocked, but I told myself it was just the casual shorthand of a married couple. "We thought," she said slowly, "that it might be nice to open up the kitchen into the dining room. Make it more of an open floor plan. The house would be worth so much more." "I'm not selling the house," I said. "We know," Alicia said quickly. "This isn't about selling. It's just about making it nicer for everyone. Brett knows a contractor who can do it cheap." I didn't say anything else that night. I made my tea, I sat in my chair, and I thought about the fact that my son-in-law had invited a stranger with a measuring tape into my home without asking me. I thought about that for a long time. That was February. By April, things had shifted in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. The way a room looks different when you come back from vacation, even though nothing has technically moved. Brett had stopped working entirely by then. He'd had a series of opportunities that didn't pan out and was focusing on some business ideas. I never saw evidence of these business ideas. What I did see was Brett on the couch most mornings when I left for work, and Brett on the couch most evenings when I came home, and Brett's truck in my driveway taking up the space where I used to park. Alicia had found part-time work at a hair salon 3 days a week. I was glad for her. But 3 days a week at a salon in our town was not going to cover 2 adults' expenses, and they had stopped contributing anything to the household. When they first moved in, Alicia had given me $200 a month for groceries. Then it became $100. Then it stopped without any conversation at all, and when I brought it up gently, Brett had explained that they were going through a tight stretch and looked at me in a way that made me feel like the unreasonable one for mentioning it. I was paying the mortgage on my own. I had paid the mortgage on my own for 22 years, since my husband passed. The house was mine, fully in my name, bought with the insurance money and my own savings and 22 years of discipline. 4 bedrooms, a good backyard, a kitchen I had renovated myself in 2019 by saving for 2 years. That kitchen mattered to me. When Alicia was growing up, I made every holiday dinner in that kitchen. I taught her how to make biscuits in that kitchen. It was mine in a way that went beyond the deed. In May, I came home to find that Brett had moved my good stand mixer, the KitchenAid I had owned for 15 years, off the counter and into the pantry. In its place was a big plastic container labeled in black marker on masking tape, Brett T. and Alicia. I stood there in my kitchen and looked at that label. Then I opened the pantry. My mixer was shoved behind a bag of dog food. They didn't even have a dog. I moved my mixer back. I didn't say anything. A week later, there was a new label on the refrigerator handle. Same masking tape, same black marker, B&A shelf. Do not talk. I opened the fridge. They had organized it so that the middle two shelves, the best ones at eye level, had their food on them. My food had been pushed to the bottom shelf and the door. I stood there for a long moment. Then I closed the refrigerator door and I noticed there was another label on the outside, on the actual door of my refrigerator, the one I had bought on a Black Friday sale in 2021 for $700, that said OUR fridge. Not our shelf. Not our section. Our fridge. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed. I have a photo on my nightstand of my husband and me at our daughter's 5th birthday party. He's holding her up on his shoulders and she's wearing a paper crown, and both of them are laughing. I looked at that photo for a while, then I got up and I started making some calls. Let me back up a little, because there is something you need to understand about Brett that took me a long time to see clearly. Brett is charming. He is the kind of man who makes you feel good for about 10 minutes, and then, if you pay attention, you start to notice that every conversation somehow circles back to something he wants. He had done this with Alicia in a way that I only started to recognize clearly around the time of the fridge labels. She had been a confident, opinionated young woman. Not easy, not always right, but her own person. By the time they had been living with me for a year, she checked with Brett before she agreed to anything. She apologized when he was annoyed. She explained his moods to me like it was her job. I had tried, twice, to talk to her about this. The first time she told me I didn't understand their dynamic. The second time she cried and said I never liked Brett and I was making things difficult. I dropped it. I dropped it because I was afraid of losing her, and I am not proud of that fear, but I am trying to be honest. So when I made my calls, I did not call Alicia. Not yet. I called my neighbor 2 doors down. His name is Ron, and he is a retired attorney, and he has been a good friend to me since his wife and I were in the same book club for 12 years. I asked him if he could recommend a real estate attorney. He asked me why. I told him what was happening. He was quiet for a moment. Then he gave me a name and he said, Mildred. Don't wait too long. I also called my sister Patty in Columbus. She said, I knew that boy was trouble from the rehearsal dinner. She had, in fact, said exactly this at the rehearsal dinner, which I had hushed her about, and I told her so. She said, I'm not going to say I told you so. Then she said it anyway. I needed to hear it. In June, Brett had a conversation with me that I have thought about almost every day since. I came downstairs on a Saturday morning to find him already up, which was unusual. He was sitting at my kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee like he'd been waiting. He gestured at the chair across from him. I sat down because I was curious. I've been thinking, he said, about the long-term situation here. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug. Which situation is that? The living situation. This house. He paused. Alicia and I have been talking about our future, and honestly, Mildred, this house is a big part of that. I didn't say anything. We're not going anywhere, he said. We're family. And the way we see it, since Alicia grew up here, she has a real emotional and honestly a kind of moral claim on this place. He said it like it was a reasonable thing, like it was something I would of course agree with once I heard it put that way. I looked at him for a long time. Is that right? I said. We're thinking about the future, maybe putting both our names on things, making it more official. Both our names on what things exactly? He smiled. We can talk about specifics. But I just want us to be on the same page, as a family. I told him I appreciated him being open with me. I told him I needed to think about it. He seemed satisfied by this, which told me everything I needed to know about how well he thought he had me figured out. That afternoon, I drove to the office of the attorney Ron had recommended. Her name is Constance, and she had short silver hair and the kind of direct eye contact that made me feel immediately safe. I laid out the whole situation. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Your house is solely in your name." I said yes. She said, "Have you signed anything?" I said no. She said, "Good. Let's talk about what you actually need to do." The thing about having a plan is that it changes how you move through a situation. You stop reacting. You start watching. I watched Brett tell Alicia that I had been receptive to his ideas about the house, which I had not been. I watched Alicia stop asking me how my day was. I watched Brett invite his brother over one Sunday afternoon, and the two of them walking around my backyard discussing fence lines. I did not go outside. I watched from the kitchen window, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not sadness, something more like clarity. I went to work. I came home. I was polite at dinner. I did not put labels on anything. I did not take labels off anything. I let Brett believe whatever he needed to believe. Meanwhile, I was doing a number of things that were none of Brett's business. I opened a separate checking account at a different bank than the one where my direct deposit had gone for years. I started having a portion of each paycheck deposited there. I did not tell anyone. I had a long conversation with Constance about a document called an authorization to occupy, which is essentially a formal letter that establishes the terms under which a person is staying in your home, and more importantly, makes clear that they have no ownership interest and can be asked to leave with proper notice. She helped me draft it. I did not present it yet. I waited. I also called Alicia's Aunt Cheryl, my sister-in-law from my husband's side, who Alicia has always adored. And I had coffee with her, and I told her everything. Not to gossip, not to gather allies, but because Cheryl is wise in a way that I sometimes am not, and I needed someone in Alicia's world who knew what was happening. "She loves him," Cheryl said. "I know," I said. "She might not thank you for this." "I know that too." Cheryl stirred her coffee. "Are you doing this for her or for yourself?" I thought about that question honestly. "Both," I said, "but mostly for her. Because this is not going to end well if it keeps going, and I am the only one left who can stop it." Cheryl nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" In July, Brett made his move. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe that he had softened me up enough. Maybe that he had waited as long as his patience allowed. He came to me one evening with a folder. Inside was a handwritten document, 2 pages, which he described as a family agreement about the house. It said that in exchange for ongoing care and maintenance contributions, I never saw a single receipt for any such contributions, Alicia and Brett would receive a 30% ownership interest in the property. He presented it to me at the kitchen table with the same calm smile he'd used in June. I took the folder. I thanked him for putting it together. I said I would look it over. He seemed satisfied again. Alicia, sitting beside him, watched my face very carefully. I smiled at her. 3 days later, Constance had reviewed the document. It had no legal standing, had not been drafted by an attorney, would not hold up to the slightest scrutiny, and included several statements that were factually incorrect, including a claim that Brett had contributed substantially to home improvements, which was false. Constance found this almost funny. I did not find it funny, but I did find it clarifying. I made a decision. I called Ron and asked if I could borrow his notary stamp for a document. He said yes, and he also said he'd like to be present when I delivered whatever I was delivering, in case you need a witness. I told him I thought that was a very good idea. On a Thursday evening in late July, I asked Brett and Alicia to sit down with me in the living room after dinner. I could tell Brett thought this was the moment I was going to sign his family agreement. He was relaxed. He had his arms stretched out along the back of the couch. Alicia was tense in the way she'd been tense for months. Not afraid of me, but afraid of the space between us that Brett had been quietly widening for 2 years. Ron sat in the armchair by the window. I had introduced him as a friend who was going to witness a document, and Brett had frowned slightly at this but said nothing. I set the folder on the coffee table. Not Brett's folder. Mine. "I've had some time to think about everything," I said, "and I want to be clear about where we stand as a family." I opened the folder. The first document was the authorization to occupy, 2 clean pages, drafted by Constance, notarized, with a line at the bottom for Brett and Alicia to sign. It established that they were guests in my home, that they had no ownership interest in the property, and that continued occupancy was contingent on a monthly contribution of $400 to household expenses, effective in 30 days. I watched Brett's expression change. This isn't, he started. Let me finish, I said. The second document was a letter from Constance's office, on legal letterhead, noting that any informal agreements regarding property ownership would require proper legal documentation, independent counsel, and a full title search, and that any attempt to establish an ownership claim without these steps would be considered legally invalid. The third document was a printed copy of my deed. My name, only my name, and 22 years of property tax records paid in full. I looked at Brett. I love my daughter, I said. She is welcome in my home for as long as she needs to be here, but this house is mine. It was mine before I met you, and it will be mine after you. I am not signing anything that says otherwise. I am not putting your name on my deed. I am not entertaining any further conversations about renovation plans, open floor concepts, or family agreements that you drafted yourself at my kitchen table. The room was very quiet. Brett said, "You're being unreasonable." His voice had changed, the easy charm was gone, and what was underneath it was not pleasant. "I don't think I am," I said. He looked at Alicia. She was looking at the documents, at the deed, at the 3 years of property tax records. "Alicia," he said. She didn't answer right away, and in that pause, in the 3 or 4 seconds of silence that followed, I saw something happen on my daughter's face. Not a dramatic revelation, just something small and careful and very quiet. She looked at the folder, she looked at me, she looked at the folder again. "Mom," she said finally, "how long have you been planning this?" "Long enough," I said. Brett did not sign the authorization to occupy that night. He went to bed angry. The next morning, he told me the document was an insult and he was going to talk to a lawyer of his own. I said that was absolutely his right and that Constance's contact information was on the letterhead if his attorney wanted to reach out. He did not talk to a lawyer. What he did instead, over the next 2 weeks, was make the atmosphere in the house as unpleasant as possible. Going quiet at dinners, making remarks under his breath, disappearing for long stretches and coming back smelling like beer. I watched all of this and I did not engage with it. I went to work. I came home. I was polite. Alicia, during those 2 weeks, started spending time with me in the evenings. Small things. She'd come into the kitchen while I was making dinner and just stand there, not talking, handing me things when I needed them. One night she said, "I didn't know about the family agreement. He didn't tell me he was writing it." I said I believed her. She nodded and didn't say anything else. On a Tuesday in August, Alicia called me at work. She said Brett had left. She said she'd come home to find that he'd taken his clothes and his truck and about $300 from their shared account, and that he'd left a note that said he needed space to figure out his path. I sat at my desk for a moment. Then I said, "I'll be home by 6. Do you want me to pick up something for dinner?" She was quiet. Then she said, "That fried chicken place on Maple, maybe?" "Done," I said. That was 7 months ago. Brett has not come back. He called Alicia twice in September, and from what she told me, both conversations were his version of a slow-motion attempt to make her feel responsible for his choices. She handled both calls better than I would have at her age. The second time, she put him on speaker and let me listen from the next room. Afterwards, she looked at me and said, "Okay." "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." That was the whole conversation, and it was enough. She signed the authorization to occupy in October. She sits down with me every first of the month and hands me $400 in cash, and I take it, and we both feel better for the transaction even if we never talk about why. She has been looking for full-time work. She's been talking to someone, a therapist recommended through her salon's insurance plan. She stands up straighter than she did a year ago. Last Saturday, she made biscuits from the recipe we learned together when she was 9 years old, and she plated them on my mother's china, and we ate breakfast at the table by the window, and the morning light came in, and it was, for the first time in a long time, just my kitchen again. The deed still has only one name on it, mine. The masking tape labels are gone. I peeled them off myself, every single one, the day after Brett left. It took about 4 minutes. Underneath, the surfaces were exactly as they had always been. My refrigerator, my stand mixer, my kitchen, my house. I will retire in 14 months. I have enough saved to do it comfortably. My plan is to put a small garden in the backyard. There's a section along the south fence that gets good light all afternoon, and to stop wearing shoes that hurt my feet, and to make biscuits on Saturday mornings for as long as I am able. I am 63 years old. This is my house. I built this life with my own 2 hands, and I intend to live in it. And if anyone ever puts a label on my refrigerator again, they will find out very quickly that I have Constance's number memorized. I have been turning this over in my mind for months now, the way you turn a river stone in your hand, not looking for anything, just feeling the weight of it. What Brett did was not complicated when I finally saw it clearly. He found a woman who loved her daughter more than she loved being right, and he used that love like a lever. He was patient about it. He didn't come in loud. He came in helpful, charming, full of long-term thinking, and then, slowly, he rearranged things. The labels on my fridge weren't really about food. The stranger with the measuring tape wasn't really about renovation. They were about testing how much I would absorb before I said something. The answer he was counting on was everything. What I want to say, and I mean this not as a lecture but as something I had to learn the hard way at 63 years old, is that kindness without a spine is not kindness. It is an invitation. I was so afraid of losing Alicia that I kept shrinking the space I took up in my own home, in my own life. Every time I said nothing, I told Brett that saying nothing was acceptable. Every time I moved my mixer back without a word, I showed him that I would absorb the next thing too. I thought I was being the bigger person. I was actually just making myself smaller. The turning point wasn't anger. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect the story to hinge on a moment of fury, a slammed door, a shouting match, a dramatic confrontation. That's not what happened for me. The turning point was sitting on the edge of my bed, looking at a photo of my husband and my daughter and thinking, this is not what I built. This is not what he worked for. This is not what she deserves to grow up into. That thought was quiet, but it was the clearest thing I had felt in a year. Tracing the line of cause and effect back through the whole story, I can see now that what Brett set in motion always had a natural end. Not because the universe punishes the greedy, I don't know that it does. Not always, not on any schedule. But because a plan built on someone else's passivity can only survive as long as that person stays passive. The moment I walked into Constance's office, his plan was already finished. He just didn't know it yet. Alicia is doing the work now of figuring out who she is outside of that relationship. That is its own long road, and I try to walk beside her on it without rushing her. What I notice is this. She stands in my kitchen now like she used to stand in it as a girl. Comfortable, unhurried, like she belongs there, which she does. I am not a perfect mother. I made mistakes in this story. I waited too long. I was too afraid. I let things go on past the point where I should have spoken. I own those mistakes. But I also know this. It is never too late to stop shrinking. The document I put on that coffee table was not a weapon. It was just the truth, written down and signed by someone who finally decided the truth was worth defending. That is the only lesson I know how to offer. Be honest with yourself about what is happening, then be honest out loud, then have the paperwork ready. My name is on that deed. It always was. It just took me a little while to remember that I was allowed to say so.